welcome back. I'm Mabel Jong, and you're watching continuing coverage of the World Healthcare Congress here in Washington, D.C. And I'm here in the studio with Dr. Charles Gross, Vice President, Behavioral Health and Physical Health Integration with Anthem. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Well, I know that you're focusing a lot on behavioral health in your job and also in your presentations to the attendees here today. What are some of the topics that you're going to leave the attendees with? Some takeaways.
That's a great question. I think one of them would be somewhat paradoxically that behavioral health is going away. And let me explain what I mean by that by way of a story. Years ago, I worked for Kaiser Permanente, 20 years ago, and I was a child and family psychologist. So newly minted, so I hung my diplomas on the wall and set up my practice and then waited for patients to show up. And working between 9 and 5, seeing children and adolescents, many of them didn't show up because they were busy with school and other activities. So I was bored and I decided, let me see what else I can do. So I was on the 5th floor and I decided to walk down to the 4th floor, which is where pediatrics was located. And there were lots of patients there. The pediatricians, after ruling out any organic causes for the presenting problem, were very happy to have me see the family, see the child, deal with what might have been some of the psychological factors driving the presentation. So for years I would tell that story and say I was ahead of my time. I was practicing integrated care.
Yes.
It turns out really what I was doing was practicing behavioral health care, but instead of doing it on the 5th floor, I was doing it on the 4th floor. So I would see these families and children, but still do traditional psychotherapy.
Yes.
A 50-minute session, a 40-minute session, family therapy. Over the past several years at Anthem, we've come to really identify the need to drive beyond the traditional way of thinking about behavioral health care and look to provide care in a different way and in different settings. So for instance, instead of simply providing psychotherapy on the 4th floor instead of the 5th, we look to identify what are some of the behavioral drivers for underlying physical conditions.
Okay. That is very interesting because like you said, I can see how you were ahead of your time because now organizations are trying to integrate the services that they provide patients. So given that, what are the challenges facing behavioral health from an insurer's perspective?
Well, there are multiple. I'll start at the most basic level. Many payers, states, or on the government side, have not yet fully come to the realization that they need to provide an integrated benefit. So many will still say, Anthem, you provide the physical health benefit and we're going to contract separately for behavioral health services through a different entity. Now there are workarounds that we can use to address that, but clearly that type of funding stream does not align incentives for the insurance company or the payers, and certainly doesn't drive overall better health outcomes at the member or consumer level. So that's a huge challenge. Another is providers are, again, going back to my original point, used to doing things a certain way and delivering a product and getting paid a fee for that. With the changing paradigm of driving towards integrated care, it's really contracting at a population level and not at the individual level. So it's a journey between the insurance companies, Anthem and others, and the providers to say we have to move beyond paying based on the units you deliver and have to start paying for the outcomes that you can drive.
And so they really should be working closer together on this front.
Yes.
And what is keeping them from doing that other than it's the status quo? This is the way it's always been done.
Well, the status quo is no small thing. You've set up for years systems of care that are driven by the underlying business incentives, and to simply say we're going to change overnight means that you have to change you're thinking about how you're going to drive outcomes.
Right.
So it's really a new world that I think many people get now. I sometimes think of this as there's the world as it is and the world as it ought to be. I think many providers and insurance companies, and in general the public, understand the world as it ought to be, which is you should be treating the whole person for whatever condition presents, including folks with behavioral health challenges that are not diagnosable in the sort of traditional sense. But God forbid somebody in your family is struck with a significant illness, medical illness. There's all sorts of psychological ramifications that come out of that diagnosis that the systems of care right now are not ideally set up to deal with. So everybody knows what we ought to be doing, and yet there's the world of is, which is how things are currently structured. And making that leap is not an easy one.
Are there things going on at Anthem that other providers and payers can learn from? That maybe some innovations that are happening?
For example, I think just under 60% of our total reimbursement falls under to providers, falls under the broad umbrella of value-based care. Now, some of that is as simple, and I would make air quotes, as paying for better quality outcomes, to more sophisticated models where you contract with a provider to manage a population and all the risks and the benefits associated with managing at the population level.
Right. Are there other trending items that are happening that you're going to be discussing here at the meeting?
So there's a couple that leap to mind. One is, again, I think the notion of behavioral health disappearing at some point is an important one to keep in mind, because it'll be provided at the point of care, and not that, go see Dr. Gross and do traditional psychotherapy. It'll be, we're going to deal with the issues here and maybe in the same consulting room, and Dr. Gross may come in and see you, versus now I have to make a whole separate appointment and a whole different system of care. Another one is that the stigma around behavioral health services has significantly decreased over the past 10 to 15 years. The Surgeon General's report obviously was a huge step in that direction. And I think in general people acknowledge that behavioral health doesn't have the stigma that it once did. And the final point I would mention is the increasing recognition that social determinants play in driving outcomes. Again, particularly on the government business side, Anthem is deeply involved in understanding those, and then to the extent we're able to, influencing and getting engaged around those sorts of issues. Is the person food challenged? Are they homeless? Are they at risk of homelessness? Do they have transportation issues? So Anthem clearly has recognized that those often are as big, if not bigger, drivers of healthcare outcomes than what you would traditionally think of as healthcare interventions.
Okay. We're glad to have you back at this meeting. You haven't presented here in some time. What are you finding your experience at the World Healthcare Congress now, after this day of meetings?
It's great. The early sessions were just wonderful and thought-provoking. I think the clear recognition at the strategic level of the role of provider enablement and provider partnerships between providers and partners is reflected in the content of the Congress, so I'm thrilled to be part of it.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Gross, for your time today.
Thank you.
We're pleased to speak with you. And I'm Mabel Jong. Thanks for watching. Much more content to come.